Okay. Call to order, Town of Basalt Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, Tuesday, January 6th, 2026, first meeting of the year. A roll call.
All right. Bill Marin,
Yo.
Kyle Oberketter,
Here.
Eric Vozick, Rob Levitt, Cindy Hirschfield,
Here.
Mike Horvath,
Here.
Bob Kaplan,
Here.
and Ben Firestein.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
All right, let's get to first order of business. Approved minutes from November 18th, 2025. Anyone have any changes or additions to make? And if not, do we have a motion?
Make a motion.
We have a first.
I'll
We have a
second.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay, next item, public hearing, 72 Sunset Drive, PUD amendment. This is a continuation to January 20th, 2026. We need to vote on that?
Yes, please.
Okay. We have a motion to continue
Motion to continue.
first.
Perfect.
And do we have a second?
Second.
We have first, we have a second. I don't think we need any further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Okay, work session, Midland Avenue Design Guidelines.
Bill's mic?
What?
Is your mic on? Does it show green light?
Yes.
I was leaning into it.
Start again.
Is this is this one a dud? Do we need to change it?
No, you're fine.
I'm good?
I just can't find you.
Oh, usually the video, the camera will spin over to the microphone.
Uh-huh. All right, it's not doing it.
Just wave your hands next time when you're talking.
Okay, work session.
All right. Should I lean down? Okay.
Yeah, and maybe we'll introduce you. This is Jessica Hubbard from GM Shea Architects. They are working on the design guidelines for the Midland Avenue area that was hired by the town to produce those guidelines. I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Yes. Thank you, James. So yes, to reiterate, my name's Jessica Hubbard. I am a registered architect and principal with GM Shea Architecture and Urban Design. First, I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for your time tonight. The goals for me being here tonight are to introduce you to the project, and then we would like to have a work session to allow the commission to interact and be up close with some of the provisions we have in the guidelines so far. And then hopefully we'll have time at the end, last 10 to 15 minutes, we can come back together and talk about overall feedback and recommendations that you may have. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to introduce us as a team. We are a small full-service architecture firm. Like James said, we were brought on by the town because of our extensive experience working within the National Historic Landmark District of Savannah, Georgia. And if you're not familiar with it, it is one of the most stringent design manuals in the country. We were founded 70 years ago by Bob Gunn and Eric Meyerhoff, and then my business partner, Patrick Shea, joined the team in 1996, and I opened our firm in Denver in 2023. There's 9 of us total. There's 3 of us in Colorado and 7 in Savannah, so we're small but mighty. Okay, so what is the project? Why are we here tonight? So if you're not familiar, again, we were brought on for the Midland Avenue Design Guidelines Project, and we are actually proposing to broaden that out to a district. So we're referring to it as the Midland Avenue District. So you'll see that on the boards tonight. And then going into what are design guidelines, if you've never encountered design guidelines, they are a flexible framework. They are a tool, an overlay to the municipal code to protect the special character and quaint nature of places from future development, but also providing framework and guardrails for protecting existing buildings. And whether that falls under historic buildings or just non-contributing buildings, we are providing provisions for all existing and future development. Next slide, thank you. So, like I said, why design guidelines? We are protecting the character of a certain street, pedestrian mall. In this case, we're proposing a district. And then we're also encouraging the preservation of Basalt's unique charm and historic characteristics. This is the proposed district. I also have it on the board over here too, so you can take a look at it when you're up and about later. But we essentially have expanded from just the buildings that are fronting Midland Avenue and encompassing other developments within the C2 business district and other areas that are fronting the Frying Pan River as well. And then this slide, this came from our open house back in November. We had someone stand up and say, well, what really makes Midland Avenue special? And so we have started to define in the guidelines and for you tonight, what are the characteristics that make us want to be on Midland Avenue? And the main characteristics that we've come up with are vibrant colors, materiality, playful roof lines, buildings that are designed to human scale, so keeping the massing at 2 to 3 stories when up close to the street, inviting walkable street environments, and then being connected to those historic buildings and nature as well. We have amazing pollinators on Midland Avenue thanks to the Streetscape project, and so we have started to build on that and talk about provisions for some of these characteristics that make Midland Avenue so special. And I'd like to throw in that a lot of these characteristics are driven by zoning, but they're really reinforced by design guidelines. Zoning is speaking to use and story, but then design guidelines are layering and building onto that and offering recommendations for materiality and different design features, whether it's site development or architectural detailing. So getting into our specific design guidelines, so we have broken it down into 7 sections, and I'm going to quickly go through the sections, but then we've also highlighted some of the main areas on these boards. So you'll have time to comment on those during the work session, but I'm just going to go through each section so you have an understanding of how the guidelines work. So the very first one, the project flow, this is in the introduction section. So we're looking at the guidelines from the perspective of an individual or applicant that has never been to Basalt. So they would use the guidelines, they would use the flow chart for identifying the track that their building falls under. So if it's an existing building or a new development, and then if it's an existing building, is it contributing or non-contributing? We're following the language of the National Park Service, even though none of the buildings in the Midland Avenue District are protected or listed on the National Register, which we'll get into that in a little bit. But essentially, someone, an individual, an applicant would come to the design guidelines and use section 1 to determine how to use the rest of the sections moving forward. Next slide, please. So building on that, we took the liberty of talking about the history of Basalt, again, just to provide perspective to somebody who's never been here and to build on why Midland Avenue is so special, because there is significant history with the railroad community, how the businesses were centered along the main track, and it essentially became the main business corridor for the town. And then in this section, we've also identified periods of significance aligned with History Colorado and some of the periods of significance within Colorado. So just starting to set the stage for whether or not the town wants to move forward one day and register the district as a National Historic Landmark District, or register individual buildings on the list of National Historic Places. So we'll get into that. That's something that we'd like your feedback on tonight. But again, just trying to add another layer of protection and respect for all of the significant contributing buildings within the district. And then on the next slide, we've actually identified all of the contributing buildings. These align with the Basalt Historic Inventory, and which isn't published anywhere online, and so this would seal the historic inventory into a formal document. In section 3, we start to break down recommendations on how to treat existing buildings, whether they're historic or non-contributing. We talk about historic foundation, window types, roofs, dormers, and then we also talk about discouraged treatments of existing buildings. One of the main discouraged movement would be to demolish, so we address that. And also just talk about some of the materiality and ways to treat masonry and things like that. And then section 4, we start to get into site development. So this is where we build on a lot of the elements that were implemented for the Midland Streetscape project. And then we also talk about certain recommendations for curb cuts, fences, railings, screening, service areas, things like that. And a lot of that you'll see on the boards tonight. Same with, next slide, please. Section 5, this is where we really get into the architecture. So we start to discuss massing and scaling. We talk about fenestration, transparency, glazing requirements, building entrances, roof lines, and things like that. And then in section 6, so here we're building on what's already in the municipal code and essentially outlining how the architecture and the site development should support these sustainable practices. So we have some diagrams on, for example, where solar panels should be placed and how awnings and canopies should be considered in terms of sustainability and site design. So we also recommend various green certifications. Again, we're assuming that someone's using these guidelines, they are fresh to development, they don't know anything about basalt, and so we are just providing provisions to pursue LEED or WELL or things, certifications like that. And then finally, so section 7, this is where we get into the review processes. How are we going to use these guidelines? How are we going to implement them? Right off the bat, we're not proposing a design review board. We are proposing a more objective process. So we started to put together a form that an applicant would use in a site development plan application or a building permit application. And we would like the same process for signage and lighting, and then these would be reviewed at a staff level. And then we also have a provision in section 7 that speaks to appeals and variances. So if there's a building use or a design that doesn't fit the guardrails of the design guidelines, then that's always an option to the applicant to appeal or apply for a variance depending on what they need. And so before we break out, the goal tonight would also be to get your input on these review processes. If you think that there are elements of the design guidelines that are better suited for the municipal code, we are certainly open to recommending those amendments to the code. Would love your feedback on how to review some of these other elements that may seem subjective. The goal is to create an objective process just to provide guardrails for future development, whether it's new construction or adhering to a historic building. So that's pretty much the summary of everything. Any questions before we move on to the next 2 slides and talk about the work session and how we're gonna do this?
So these are the objectives and the guidelines that are on top of the current zoning and other guidelines that are in place.
Correct.
A whole nother layer just for the info.
Correct, they would be an overlay.
Okay.
And this will live in the town code? Is this a separate document?
It'll be a supplement to the town code. So we'll have sections in the code that refer to this document, right? Kind of similar to how the building code refers to the sustainable building regulations.
But from an administrative standpoint, it has the same weight, legal weight as the code does, right? Or not?
Yes, but
'Cause the
they're
guidelines say,
guidelines.
kind of, do it if you feel like it? Or do you
I think that
have to
goes-
do it?
That goes into the, you kind of mentioned it, like not having a design review board. So then how do you control the process? Maybe we'll get into that. Thank you. And maybe we'll get into the design review board piece. That seems like the piece that isn't clear.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's going on with this desk. Tonight is an initial conversation on this because it's a lot to digest, and this is going to come back to you again for final recommendations and taking it forward. So this is a good place to start and something that we can also build on our next review. You'll probably want to get a little bit more into the details and the meat of it, and then we can come back to the process.
2 questions. Did the district get smaller than what was originally proposed in the RFP?
Oh, yes.
Slightly,
Yes.
yeah.
What was the justification for that reduction in the district size? Or the property boundary that we are defining as this district?
So going back across the street with Ute Center, Riverside Plaza was
Yeah.
removed from the area that was originally included. It is a PUD over there, and basically it's fully built out. And so staff and some of the members of the public that showed up at the first open house thought that it was appropriate to kind of remove that since it's doesn't have future development potential anytime.
It doesn't have future development potential?
There's one building that is still approved to be built, but it's on the other side of the site, so not really tied to Midland Avenue.
Okay. And then on the high side of the hill, was it the Armory not in that? It was not part of the district? Anything across Homestead?
No,
No.
no. This is really focused on the commercial core.
Commercial core.
Yeah.
But the original RFP did include the residential hill district.
Okay.
That's what you're
Sorry,
thinking of.
That's what you're thinking of. Yep,
Yes.
sorry.
So the residential hill district was part of that original
Correct.
RFP.
And then
Yes.
we scaled it back to just commercial.
Just commercial.
Town council requested that we scale it down to just the commercial district.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk about that, because I lived in one of the nicer Victorians that showed up in 2 of your photos that got torn down after I moved out. And that really happens a lot. I mean, since I've been here, I think there's been at least 10 of them that have gone.
So there are 2 homes there on Homestead. Is that an accurate representation or it's been pulled away from there?
It is an accurate representation, and they are actually not included in the district, but they're on our map because of the parcel. I think the
Parcel runs all the way, but
They do.
Yes.
They run all the way through from Midland to Homestead. And those are 2 single-family houses. Town staff has had pre-application conferences on both of those properties over the last couple of years with concepts of changing them to either mixed use or having a commercial component.
They're non-contributing buildings.
Okay. And then the second question was the list of properties that you provided there that is not formalized, but is this document formalizing those properties?
We have a historic inventory that's a local historic inventory.
Okay.
Let me go to the list of properties here. All of these buildings are on that list of historic inventory. There's a broader list than just these buildings, but there's not too many more. Most of the town's historic inventory is these commercial buildings. There is maybe 1 or 2 residential properties that are historically designated. There's the Longhouse over on Riverside Drive, and then I believe that there's one more in the Hill District that's designated.
What about the Rebecca Lodge? It's across the street from
Rebecca
Sloss.
Lodge is
That's
designated,
included,
yeah,
as is Sloss.
as is Sloss, yeah,
Yeah.
they're both on the
The one I
historic.
was talking about was right next to Sloss. People who owned Slosses tore down because they could.
What is it, is there a difference between the National Historic Landmark designation and a historic building this represents?
Yes,
Okay.
there
So
is.
what is that difference?
So the difference is because you designate a National Historic Landmark District does not mean that every building within the district is listed on the National Register. So they're essentially separate processes. You would have to designate the district, and then you'd also have to designate each of the individual contributing buildings.
But each of those buildings are on a register?
None
They're on a local inventory.
It's just a local,
None are-
or just a, okay,
currently listed on the National Register.
okay, that's, all right.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Can you remind me of the genesis of this project?
Thank you. So this project's really born out of the Midland Streetscape project being completed and development pressures moving into Basalt. We are all aware that there are certain properties that are ripe for redevelopment and that we want redevelopment to happen, but as part of the Midland Streetscape project, the goal of that project was to highlight and emphasize the historic qualities in this area. And so to maintain, because these are not on a national register, we don't have teeth right now to say that you can't demo some of the buildings that really contribute to what makes Midland special. So this is an effort to create some design guidelines so that when redevelopment comes, because it is coming and it's here, we have tools to maintain what aspects of the design and the character we all want to keep. And so the goal is not to, it's to guide redevelopment because we can't deny it, and so that we're proactive about it coming in. And that's really the genesis for it.
So it was staff generated as opposed to coming from council or?
Well, what's really interesting is that the request for the design guidelines actually came from the citizens up on the Hill District for the residential area. And then that kind of grew down onto the Midland Streetscape as well.
Also, the last master plan anticipated that we would do this.
Yes.
It didn't say specifically to do it, but it was trying to dovetail with this type of thing.
It's true. In the master plan, there is a statement requesting pursuit of a historic district designation.
And it seems a little backwards that the streetscape was redesigned before this.
Well, the streetscape, since it doesn't adjust buildings, it just adjusts the street, that's different.
Okay, just curious.
Sure.
So some of these historic contributing buildings are not in the district. So how does that work?
These all are.
The ones on Homestead?
Most of them on Homestead are not, except for Tierney Mercantile. Yeah, I think Tierney Mercantile is the only one.
But
It's
it
in
sounds
the
like the
district.
parcel though runs
Correct.
from Midland up to Homestead. That's why it's got. in
Not
there.
all of them, though.
I didn't think so, but
So just to be really clear, being a contributing building doesn't mean that it means that we're trying to take pieces of the design of that contributing building and roll it into the rest of the design guidelines.
Say that one more time, sorry.
Yeah, understood. So we're trying to take the elements of the contributing buildings, whether it's the size of the windows, the roof articulation, the materials. We're trying to take those qualities and roll them into design guidelines that would be applied or help guide redevelopment of other properties. And so while that list is not, maybe this is the point, it's not exhaustive. But it is what we're drawing from to create the guidelines.
Understood.
And you'll see that in our diagrams too. Once you look at the boards, most of our diagrams are using contributing buildings to represent the rule that we're trying to create, right? Like the storefront design or the window proportion, because Tierney Mercantile is a perfect example. I mean, it wasn't always a residence, right? It was a storefront. So
And so could someone knock down the historic buildings on Homestead? Do we have anything to prevent that from happening?
Not the ones, yes, we have some language and requirements in the local historic designation code requirements that sets up a process if somebody wanted to request a demo, a portion of one of those buildings, it would have to be evaluated through a P&Z council process. Or if they want to do an addition to one of those buildings. The tricky part is that we have a lot of single-family houses in the Hill District on Homestead and Sopris that were built 1880s to early 1900s that aren't designated as historic buildings in the local inventory. Because the history has been that the town has basically made the historic designation voluntary for residential properties. And for commercial properties, the town originally designated most of the buildings on Midland Avenue that had the historic character. And so those are protected from demo through that local historic designation ordinance.
So as part of this, do the demolition portions of the code get rewritten? Or is that just stays as is?
It'll probably be adjusted through our larger code amendments that we're doing. The kind of full code rewrite that we're doing.
What was the criteria for the contributing buildings versus the adjacent structures that are not contributing?
for the historic inventory or for us?
Correct, for the historic inventory.
The historic inventory, the local historic inventory doesn't break it out into contributing, non-contributing buildings. That's kind of more for the design guideline establishment. Basically, in the local historic inventory, if you're designated, you're just designated historic. And you have the same requirements regardless of whether your building's kind of
So it's not
unchanged over time.
It's not a date of establishment or building prior to X date or
Not in the local inventory.
not local. So you've got a property like the Snell building, CC's,
Right.
which has been remodeled and, you know, is newer looking. That's in the historic inventory, but
Yep.
why am I blanking on the pie shop restaurant?
Heather's.
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 Thank you.
Yep.
Heather's is not.
To build on that, our guidelines did, I think, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of the buildings in the historic inventory would fall under contributing for our definition, because our definition was the building built during a period of significance?
Okay.
And just as an example, we really like the Three Bears building, but that building was built in 1993, and so it doesn't fall under our definition of a contributing building. So for us, building on the historic inventory, we're essentially saying all of these buildings are contributing because they were built during a period of significance.
Okay.
And designating, or the National Historic Landmark District designation, I mean, that of it ultimately comes from applying for it, right? And then
Correct.
whoever, what's the National Park Service, that,
Correct.
so they would,
And SHPO.
what happens, like they review the application, do they send someone here to look at it, or do they just look at the application and?
Yeah,
Accept or
it's an
deny.
extensive process. it's a little different than the National Register, but yes, it's an application. It's through the SHPO, which is History Colorado, and they work in tandem with National Park Service.
Thanks.
Is there any national data of what happens to the values of buildings that get placed historic? Because now it becomes more expensive to redo these buildings, and anyone who has to do it then has to obviously rent for more, and you just kind of start maybe having the opposite effect you thought you were going to have. Is there, or any way we could look into that?
I don't know off the top of my head, but
Yeah, so again, I guess we can definitely see if there's something to that. Overall, the input is that it makes it more valuable because you're maintaining what already made the area interesting and unique. That being said, to be really clear with everybody, what's notably different for Midland and Basalt is that unlike maybe our neighbor Aspen or some other areas that have a lot of untouched historic buildings that are designated, most of these buildings have been remodeled at some level. So the integrity of the historic aspect is really at face value for many of these. And that's why these are design guidelines. So this, while it's very interesting and I welcome all the questions, this is not about designating properties as historic. It's to say, hey, you know what, please don't come in and put in a glass building.
Mhm.
That's the intention here, if that's where everybody wants to go. So the intention is to say kind of the Three Bears building is actually an excellent example because town basically, maybe from one perspective, got very lucky that that developer decided to build the building that matched the rest of Midland. Whether that's going to happen going forward when redevelopment comes, it may not unless we have some guidelines to help guide it that direction. So that's really the conversation that we're at here, and for that reason is why we don't have a requirement to designate buildings historic, and all we can do is kind of encourage and make incentives that people will do that, so.
Understood.
But if it's designated as the district, does that change anything or no? In terms of requiring people to?
I think an element to be considered a district is to have design guidelines so that you're maintaining this. Otherwise, what is the difference, right? Yeah,
But it's not but it's still a guideline, not a requirement?
true.
Okay.
should we break to look at the boards?
We should.
Do you want to talk about your last two slides?
Yes. So we want to hear from you. Just want to touch on some considerations as you're looking at the boards. Like I've said, the guidelines are for the Midland Avenue District, so just keep that in mind. We're not talking about Residential Hill District. And feel free to reference the base map on one of the boards. The guidelines are for new development only. We completely understand that a lot of the existing buildings would not actually meet the provisions of the guidelines today, so those buildings would essentially be grandfathered in. And then, like I talked about previously, if there are any buildings or uses that would not adhere to the guidelines, an appeal or a variance is always an option, so keep that in mind too. And then final slide. So options for feedback tonight. I have green and red stickers. So green is I like it, red is I don't like it. If you have more comments, feel free to add sticky notes to the boards or around the boards. Really do whatever you want to provide feedback. And then I also do have a few areas for feedback that align with the blue text box. So if you want to respond to that, you can use the feedback form that I gave all of you, or you can write anything on here too. It's really open. We just welcome all of your feedback. I did put on here feedback on designating the Midland Avenue District as a National Historic Landmark District. Would love, I think we've talked a lot about it, but would love your feedback. Please feel free to write it down. So yeah, please explore.
I have one little comment.
Sure.
When you do these things, I imagine you would have heard this before. Make the colors of the dots something that colorblind people can see,
Oh, okay. Sure.
because I can't see them.
Oh, okay. Sure. Thank you for your
We'll,
feedback.
we'll give you a green set and a
No, I'll
red
just-
set.
I'll
and
ask-
just
I ask
say right
people.
hand. Yeah, I know. I would, before you break out and look at them, there was one item that Jessica briefly talked about, which is the having a kind of variance process.
Yeah.
What we heard from several of the architects that came to kind of the group open house previously kind of encouraged there to be a process that you could be exempted from certain elements if you came up with a better idea as an architect or designer than what the guidelines provide, and you know, I think that's an important element.
But the approver of that variance is staff on an administrative level on that form that you provided an example picture of, correct? That's the intent of the procedural side of this?
It's a detail that we would need to work out whether, I mean, I guess it would just, you know, it would depend on what the request was. If it was to ask for a window that is 2 inches taller, or if it's to ask for something different. It'd just be kind of a magnitude there.
And I didn't put this on the boards because it's such a small section in the guidelines, but we did speak to monumental buildings. Those are typically civic in nature. So like the public library, it's not within the district, but it's a great example of a monumental building that wouldn't necessarily fall within the guidelines, but that use isn't permitted within the C2 business district anyway. So, the guidelines really should align with the uses that are already in the municipal zoning code, but we want to give any applicant an opportunity to appeal in case there is a unique design.
But it would also apply to the town as far as a new town hall would be concerned.
Yeah, Lions Park is included in there, so if the town were to look to redevelop a new town hall, that would be part of the consideration.
Which is interesting, because this was the town dump during the historic times.
Clearly.
Tell us how you really feel, Michelle.
Fill it in.
I would classify a town hall as a monumental civic.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so I think uses like that would require, I don't know, a special review or,
It was just my lame attempt at humor.
yeah.
You made me laugh, so it worked.
But that procedural side is still being worked out.
Yeah, I think as far as the procedure, I think we're trying to get a temperature for how much enthusiasm there is. Do you really want it to stay, do you want this to be a more strict approach? Where things are we're really dialing it in and keeping it as much as it is today as possible? Or are we looking for having this have some direction for new development that comes in that says, hey, we don't want to make it so expensive that people won't come in and that we have dilapidated buildings or whatever the case is. But we do want to see some innovative design come in, but that also matches the goal. So we're trying to get that temperature because as noted, these buildings don't have a ton. We're not Aspen that's had a 50-year historic preservation program.
But you also realize that developers will say that anyway.
Absolutely.
Let them try to make that effort or not.
Absolutely. So that's where we need the community's input to tell us, hey, this is really important and valuable to us. Put as many teeth in it as you can, or build flexibility into it, or this is really interesting to us. We would be okay with 5 stories as long as it was painted in a Victorian manner, whatever it is. That's what we're trying to get kind of the understanding and the temperature and acceptance for. So that's what you'll see when you look at the boards. And again, this is a first pass because there's a lot to consider here. So know that I know you're not going to get all of your questions and you're going to have more thoughts after we're done with this, and we'll be back. So
And I also put an outline of what we have so far, and I attached my business card to it as well. So feel free to follow up with any questions or reach out to Michelle, James, or Carlton.
Also, once we get a working draft of this, could you send it around with plenty of time for us to digest it? That'd be great.
All right, well, enjoy your voting with your dots.
So we're putting all our stuff right on those.
Yeah.
Without blocking.
Yeah, there
people's
are also
reading.
sheets that you can write on too.
Yeah, or sticky notes too.
So staff and Jessica, appreciate you working through reading and reviewing some of the guidelines and providing feedback. We wanted to give you an opportunity to get back together and see if you wanted to talk about any of the elements kind of as a group, or if you would just like us to take this feedback and kind of mull adjustments before bringing them back to you.
I have a slight request when we have our next packet with this stuff in it. Could we get small samples of other people's guidelines to compare, see how other people write theirs? Or at least could you have them down here for us to come and look at? I think that would be really helpful to see what other people do. At least ones that you as professionals see as successful.
Does Telluride have one?
We must.
Telluride's a nightmare.
Because they have strict guidelines, or?
They have a design review board. They have the HARC.
Yeah, I think what will be challenging, we can absolutely do that. I think what will be challenging is just this is not historic preservation, they're design guidelines. And so I think, being able to probably read, for instance, from Telluride, historic preservation guidelines are going to be very specific and much more code-oriented than design guidelines.
Yeah, because I want an example of what we are trying to do.
If we're only trying to have design guidelines, then why is there even the need to consider National Historic Landmark District?
Again, that's kind of back to the flavor of taking the temperature of how much do we want this to feel like it has preservation to it versus how much is it continuing a feel and an aesthetic.
If you label something historic locally, do you have any access to grants? Because it's a local designation? You still do?
So currently today, for example, if we were to apply for an economic development grant, this was available during COVID, because it was COVID related, not historic preservation related. There were grants for businesses to get funds to do maintenance on their street fronts, on their storefronts while the pandemic was happening. Of course, luckily, today the pandemic is gone. So that grant originated from historic preservation grants. So to your point, that was a long way of getting to, yes, if we're in a district, we have more access to grants.
As part of Area 3, the buffer zone, can you kind of define, so that's if you're not going to build to the lot line? Is that required to be landscaping or?
The buffer zone. The intent of the buffer zone is actually just for occupied spaces. So a good example would be like a rooftop bar. And the buffer zone would have, it's an area for planting or seating, just so that pedestrians, occupants aren't at the edge, not visible from the street, because there may be developments that come in and want to have a rooftop bar on level 3 or level 4, and we're just trying to maintain that human scale. So the buffer zone is more just to keep patrons away from the edge along Midland if it's at level 3.
Thank you.
Are we done with this work session?
Yeah, if you are done with questions for now, and then we'll be back. So when you'll have a chance to look at the document and bring more specific questions, noodle on it, bring some more ideas, and we'll have a part 2.
What's the timeline on that, do you think?
Quickly in the next meeting or 2.
All right, thanks.
We're gonna get you while it's fresh.
All right, commissioner comments and staff updates. Let's do staff updates
Okay.
first.
Taking a total twist here, BPAC, our Public Arts Commission, the annual grant cycle is open. So anybody that is interested in pursuing a grant for performing or visual arts. You can find it on our website, basalt.net. Those are due in March, I believe, with an award in April. Holiday tree recycling is available in Albany Park until February 1st, so you can clean out your house if you need to with your tree, no commercial contractors. If you use the Basalt Connect app, that app has been updated to the Roaring Fork app, which works in all of the communities up and down the valley. So just like riding rafta, you can get off and dial up your service, whether you're in Carbondale, Basalt, Glenwood, or Aspen, or even Snowmass.
So Basalt Connect doesn't work anymore?
It still works, but it's sunsetting this spring.
Okay.
And when you log into Basalt Connect, it prompts you to download the other app. So hopefully that's working out well. Applications for sponsoring or being a nonprofit to benefit from the 2026 Summer Concert Series are also open. You can find those applications on the website. And that's all. Call for council member nominations is available and open. You can pick your packet up from the town clerk any day. There are three seats open, and the election this year is on April 7th. Do you have any planning things?
Yeah, the next meeting will be January 20th, and we have an introduction meeting to the 555 Basalt Avenue, which is the Meyer Steel property application. Just an introduction meeting, and then you'll have a continued public hearing after that. And, potentially we'll have other applications on that evening as well. And staying in the nonprofit application realm, the Roaring Fork Charity Classic applications for nonprofits to put on that golf tournament are also being accepted until January 16th. If anybody has a Mid-Valley nonprofit that you want to encourage to apply.
Alrighty. Any commissioner comments? Anyone like to ventilate an idea? No? Then do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
We have first
Second.
and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thanks, everybody.
Who wants these feedback forms?
You can give them to Jessica.
Okay.
So Mike, you're saying that in order to